Tonight, let's explore a Wild West brothel from 1870, a place men visited in secret. Women never escaped, and history refused to remember in the year 1870. There were towns in the American West that never appeared on any official map. They were not planned. They were not founded with ceremony. They were born quickly, lived briefly, and disappeared without record. These towns rose where silver was found, where gold rumors spread, or where a railroad had not yet reached. They existed because men arrived faster than laws, and money arrived faster than order. One such town stood on a wide stretch of dry land, surrounded by low hills and endless dust. The wind carried sand to the streets every afternoon, and by nightfall, the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and cheap whiskey. No one could say exactly when the town began. Some said it started with a mine shaft dug too deep. Others said it began with a saloon built too early. Most agreed on one thing: it existed because men stayed longer than they planned to. By 1870, the American Civil War had ended, but its consequences had not. Thousands of men moved west, carrying scars that were not visible. Some sought land. Others sought money. Many sought silence. The town reflected that movement. The population was made up mostly of men: miners, cattle drivers, railroad workers, former soldiers, drifters with no fixed past. Women were rare. Families were even rarer. The main street was a single stretch of dirt, wide enough for wagons to pass. On one side stood a saloon, its wooden sign swinging in the wind. Next to it was a general store, poorly stocked but always open. Farther down was a blacksmith, a stable, and a small building that served as both jail and sheriff's office. Law existed, but it was weak. Order existed, but only when convenient. And near the far end of that street, away from the busiest noise, stood a two-story wooden house with red curtains in its windows. At night, a single red lamp glowed above its door. The house was never listed in town records. It paid no taxes under its true purpose. It was not mentioned in sermons. It was never spoken of directly in public, yet everyone knew it. The men knew where to go when loneliness became heavier than exhaustion. The sheriff knew which problems were better solved quietly. The mine owners knew how to keep workers calm after long weeks. Underground, the house existed in an unspoken agreement. It would remain at the edge of the town. It would cause no public trouble. And in return, it would be left alone. By day, the building looked ordinary. Weathered wood, faded paint, curtains drawn tight. No sign, no music, no laughter. By night, the red lamp signaled that the house was awake. In the American West of the 19th century, brothels were not unusual. They were often the first permanent structures built after a saloon. In many towns, they were better organized than the local government. They provided more than physical company. They offered conversation. They offered warmth. They offered the illusion of care. For men who lived months without seeing familiar faces, the presence of women clean, dressed, attentive represented something close to normal life. These houses followed rules. Violence was discouraged but tolerated when hidden. Illness was feared more than sin. And reputation mattered, even in places without respectability. This particular house had existed for nearly a decade by 1870, long enough to be accepted, long enough to be feared, long enough to collect stories that were never written down. The women who lived in the house came from many places. Some arrived from cities in the east, some from towns that no longer existed. Some had crossed oceans before crossing the plains. Few arrived by choice. in the way people imagined choice. Promises had been made. Work had been offered. Opportunities had been described differently than they truly were. Upon arrival, names were changed, not by law, but by necessity. A new name meant distance from the past. It meant protection, however thin. It meant survival. Inside the house, the woman followed a strict routine. Meals at set times. Rest during the day. Preparation before nightfall. They were not allowed to leave the town alone. They were not allowed to keep weapons. They were not allowed to speak of their pasts. The past, in this place, was considered dangerous. The men who entered the house were not monsters. Though some behaved like them, most were tired. Their hands were rough. Their clothes smelled of labor. Their eyes showed long nights without sleep. Some came weekly. Some came once and never returned. Some came only to talk. They spoke of mines that collapsed, of cattle lost to storms, of wives buried back east, of brothers who never came home from war. Inside those walls, voices were lower, movements were slower. For a few hours, the men were not workers or fighters. They were simply human. The town sheriff passed the house every night. He never stopped. The preacher mentioned sin often, but never pointed in that direction. The mine owners knew the value of peace. As long as fights stayed inside, as long as deaths were explained away, as long as illness did not spread beyond the walls, silence was the price of stability. And the house paid it well. The house stood between two ideas. Not fully respectable, not fully criminal. It was not a home. It was not a business like others. It existed in the space between need and denial. At night, the red lamp glowed steadily. Not bright, not inviting. Simply present. For travelers arriving late. The lamp was often the first sign that the town was real. For those leaving at dawn, it was the last light they remembered. In 1870, no one spoke of the house's future. The mines were still producing. The saloon was still loud. Men were still arriving, but signs of decline were already present. The ore was harder to reach. The wages were shrinking. The town's population no longer grew as quickly. The house continued its routine, unaware that history rarely announces its turning points. Inside its walls, the nights passed one after another, quietly, predictably, and without mercy. No official documents described the house. No census listed its residents accurately. No gravestones carried their names. What remained were fragments, stories told in low voices. Rumors passed between towns, memories that faded with age. This chapter of history was never meant to be remembered. And yet, it happened. In this forgotten town, in this unnamed house. In the year 1870, the house did not begin as a place of pleasure. It began as a shelter. Years before the red lamp ever hung above the door, the building stood as a simple boarding house. It was raised quickly, using cheap lumber hauled in by wagons that came from the east and never returned. The walls were thin. The floors were uneven. The roof leaked during the spring rains. At the time, the town itself was barely more than a cluster of tents and wooden shacks. Men slept wherever they could. Some stayed in wagons. Others slept in the open air. A bed with 4 walls around it was considered a luxury. The boarding house offered that luxury. For a few coins a night, a man could sleep indoors. He could eat a warm meal. He could wash the dust from his hands before morning. The woman who ran the house was already there then. Her name, at least the one most people used, was Eleanor. No one knew where she came from. Some believed she had arrived from St. Louis. Others claimed she had spent time farther south. There were rumors of a husband who never returned from the war, but no one spoke of him openly. What was clear was that Eleanor understood how the town worked. She understood that men stayed only as long as the mine paid. She understood that comfort kept them longer. She understood that survival required flexibility, that the boarding house stayed full during the early years. As the mine expanded, more men arrived. As more men arrived, the demands on the house changed. The nights grew louder. The drinking grew heavier. The arguments became more frequent. Men did not come only to sleep. They came to forget Dot at first. Eleanor resisted the change. The house had rules. Loud behavior was discouraged. Fighting was not tolerated. Women were not part of the arrangement, but pressure came from many directions. The saloon owner complained that fights broke out after men left his bar. The sheriff complained that disputes spilled into the street. The miners complained that there was nowhere to go once the whiskey wore off. The town needed a place where excess could be contained. Slowly, without announcement, the house changed. A woman arrived from the east, brought by a man who stayed only a week. She did not leave with him. Another woman followed, then another. They slept upstairs, behind closed doors. They ate separately. Their presence was not discussed. The boarding house became something else. No sign was posted. No declaration was made. The transformation happened quietly. As many things in the West, did Eleanor set new rules. Violence would not be tolerated inside the house. Any man who raised his hand would be barred permanently. Payment would be made in advance. Names would not be asked for, and stories would not be repeated. The house would not operate openly. There would be no music, no open invitations. Only those who already knew would come. The sheriff was informed after the fact. He did not protest. Instead, he visited one evening, spoke privately with Eleanor, and left without comment. After that, patrols passed the house without stopping. The understanding was simple. Trouble would stay inside. Bodies would not appear in the street. Disease would be managed quietly. In return, the house would be allowed to exist. The red lamp came later. It was small, no larger than a man's head. It hung just above the door, shielded from the wind. Its glow was faint, but unmistakable in the dark. The lamp served several purposes. It signaled that the house was open. It warned children away. It allowed men to find the door without asking. It also marked the house as something separate from the rest of the town. During the day, the lamp was unlit. The house appeared empty. Curtains were drawn. Doors were locked. The women slept or rested. Eleanor handled supplies, accounts, and quiet conversations with local merchants. By night, the lamp burned steadily. Inside, the layout of the house remained much as it had been before. A narrow hallway ran from the front door to the back. A common room sat to the left, furnished with worn chairs and a long table. Upstairs were several small rooms, each barely large enough for a bed, a wash basin, and a chair. No luxury existed here. What existed was order. Each woman was assigned a room. Each room was cleaned daily. Sheets were washed as often as possible. Illness was reported immediately. Eleanor kept a ledger, though it was never shown to anyone else. In it were names that did not match birth records, dates that did not align with calendars, notes written in careful handwriting. The ledger was not a confession. It was protection. The women who lived in the house came to understand Eleanor's authority quickly. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. But her decisions were final. Those who followed the rules were fed, clothed, and protected. Those who did not were sent away. Sent where was never discussed. Some left the town entirely. Some vanished into other settlements. Some were never spoken of again. As the house settled into its new purpose, the town adjusted around it. The saloon grew louder, knowing there was somewhere else for men to go when tempers rose. The sheriff slept easier. The mine owners noticed fewer disruptions. The house became a pressure valve. It absorbed what the town could not. Time passed in measured nights. Winter brought silence and cold. The house stayed open, though business slowed. Snow piled against the door. The red lamp glowed through frost-covered glass. Spring brought mud and sickness. More women fell ill during those months. Eleanor hired a doctor when she could afford it. When she could not, she relied on home remedies and isolation. Summer brought crowds. Men arrived in waves. Some stayed. Some left. Some died in the mines and were buried without ceremony. The house remained by the time the year 1870 arrived. The boarding house of the early days was barely remembered. The house was known only for what it had become, yet traces of its past remained. The walls still held, the sounds of boots pacing at dawn. The floors remembered the weight of men who slept without dreams. The kitchen still served meals, though fewer were eaten together. Eleanor aged quietly during these years. Her hair turned gray. Her posture stiffened. But her presence remained steady. She was neither kind nor cruel. She was practical. The women who lived under her roof came and went. Few stayed more than a few years. The work took its toll. Youth faded quickly in that environment. New women arrived as others left. The house never stood empty. The town, however, began to change. The mine produced less ore than before. Wagons came less frequently. News traveled faster now, and other towns competed for attention. Still, the house continued its nightly routine. Doors opened at dusk. The lamp was lit. The rules were enforced. What no one noticed at the time was how dependent the town had become on that quiet structure at the edge of the street. Without it, tensions would have spilled outward. Violence would have become public. Desperation would have taken other forms. The house had been built to shelter bodies. It had become something that sheltered the town itself, and like many things built out of necessity rather than intention. Its end would not come with warning. But in 1870, none of that was visible. The house stood firm. The lamp burned. The ledger filled with names. History moved forward, indifferent to the lives contained within those walls. And the house, born from convenience and compromise, continued to serve its purpose in silence. By the time the house became known for what it was, the woman who ran it had already learned how to disappear in plain sight. Her name, as it was spoken in the town, was Eleanor. No one remembered hearing a last name. None was ever used. In a place where people arrived without histories and left without records, a single name was enough. Eleanor did not dress like the women who lived under her roof. She wore dark dresses with high collars and long sleeves, even in summer. Her clothes were clean but plain, chosen for durability rather than attention. Jewelry was limited to a simple ring that never left her finger. Her hair, once dark, had faded into gray long before most women her age would allow it to show. She did not dye it. She did not hide it. She pinned it back each morning with the same care she gave to every other task. Her face carried lines that suggested neither hardship nor softness, but endurance. She rarely smiled. When she did, it was brief and deliberate. Her eyes missed very little. Eleanor spoke quietly. She did not shout across rooms. She did not repeat herself. Men learned quickly to lean in when she spoke. No one in the town remembered seeing her lose control. When arguments broke out in the common room, her presence alone often ended them. She would step into the space, stand still, and wait. Silence followed. She did not threaten violence. She did not need to. Men understood consequences without them being named. Eleanor's authority did not come from physical strength or official position. It came from knowledge. She knew who owed money. She knew who had a wife back east. She knew which men drank too much and which carried knives. She also knew when to look away. The house operated according to rules that Eleanor established early and enforced without exception. Payment was always taken before a man went upstairs. If he did not have enough, he was turned away without argument. Violence was forbidden. Any man who struck a woman inside the house was banned permanently. His name was remembered, even if he was not. The women were expected to follow rules as well. They rose at the same time each day. They kept their rooms clean. They reported illness immediately. They did not bring personal visitors into the house. They did not leave the town without permission. In return, they were fed regularly. They were clothed. They were protected from the worst behaviors that existed outside the walls. Eleanor was not gentle, but she was consistent. For many women, consistency itself felt like safety. The women called her Madam, though never to her face unless required. She did not encourage familiarity. She did not encourage fear. She encouraged obedience. New women were brought to her first. The conversation always followed the same pattern. Eleanor explained the rules. She explained the work. She explained the consequences of staying and the consequences of leaving. She did not lie. She did not promise improvement. She did not promise escape. She did not promise kindness. She offered stability. Some women cried during this conversation. Others stared at the floor. A few asked questions. Eleanor answered only what was necessary. Names were chosen afterward. Birth names were rarely used. Not because Eleanor demanded it, but because most women preferred distance from who they had been. A new name made it easier to survive the nights ahead. Eleanor kept a written list, though it was never complete. Some names were crossed out. Some were written lightly, as if not expected to last. She remembered them all. Her memory extended beyond the women. She remembered every serious incident the house had known. A man who drank himself unconscious and never woke. A woman who fell ill too quickly to be saved. A fight that nearly turned public. Each event was handled quietly. Bodies were removed at night. Stories were adjusted. Records were altered or never made. Eleanor understood the importance of appearances. The house had to seem orderly, contained, predictable. Chaos attracted attention, and attention brought change. Change was dangerous. Eleanor had learned this long before the house took its final form. No one knew how old she truly was. Some guessed she was in her 40s. Others believed she was older. Time moved differently for women like her. She rarely spoke of her past. When she did, the details were vague. A city by a river. A husband who went west and never returned. A journey that lasted longer than expected. She never spoke of love. She never spoke of regret. If she felt either, she kept it private. Her room was on the ground floor, at the back of the house. It was smaller than most of the upstairs rooms. It contained a narrow bed, a desk, and a single chair. On the desk sat the ledger. The ledger was thick and worn. Its pages were filled with neat handwriting, dates, names, notes, written in short lines. It was not a diary. It was a record of balance. Money earned, money spent, illnesses, departures, deaths. Eleanor reviewed it each night after the house had settled. She wrote by lamplight, her movements slow and careful. When she finished, she closed the book and locked it away. No one else was allowed to touch it. The ledger represented control. Without it, the house would become vulnerable. Eleanor's relationship with the town was built on distance. She did not attend church. She did not drink in the saloon. She did not socialize. When merchants delivered supplies, she paid promptly and spoke little. When the sheriff came by, it was always late, always brief. They spoke as equals, though neither would have admitted it. The sheriff understood that Eleanor prevented more trouble than she caused. Eleanor understood that the sheriff's tolerance was conditional. They did not trust each other. They cooperated. The women watched Eleanor closely, whether they realized it or not. They learned from her restraint, from her silence, from the way she never allowed emotion to dictate action. Some resented her. They saw her as cold, as distant, as complicit. Others respected her. They saw her as a barrier between themselves and the men who might otherwise harm them. Both views were accurate. Eleanor did not believe in rescue. She believed in survival. On rare occasions, a woman asked about leaving. Eleanor never discouraged it. She explained the risks. She explained what little assistance she could offer. She did not provide money unless it was owed. Those who left did so with mixed outcomes. Some married. Some found other work. Some returned within months. Eleanor did not comment. She accepted them back if they followed the rules. Age affected Eleanor in ways she did not discuss. Her joints stiffened. Her steps slowed. But her routine never changed. She rose before dawn. She reviewed supplies. She checked on the women. At night, she remained awake long after the house grew quiet. Sleep, when it came, was light. The house depended on her attention. Without it, small problems would grow. Without it, the balance would shift. In the town, Eleanor was spoken of with a mixture of respect and discomfort. She was not invited to gatherings, but she was consulted during disputes. Men who insulted her publicly found themselves unwelcome in places they needed. Her influence was subtle. She did not demand loyalty. She created dependence. By 1870, Eleanor had been running the house for nearly 10 years. The woman who had once opened a boarding house now oversaw a structure that existed beyond simple definition. It was not only a business, it was a system, one that required constant adjustment. She noticed changes before others did. The number of new women arriving slowed. The quality of customers declined. The town's energy shifted. She did not react immediately. Eleanor had learned patience. She adjusted expenses. She reduced unnecessary purchases. She prepared for leaner times without announcing it. The women noticed. Fewer new dresses arrived. Meals became simpler. The house grew quieter. Eleanor did not explain. She never explained more than necessary. To the women, she remained a fixed presence. A figure who did not waver, even as everything around them did. To the town, she was a constant. But constants, like all things, are temporary. Eleanor understood this better than most. She had built the house not out of ambition, but adaptation. She had maintained it through compromise rather than idealism. And she knew, even if she did not say it aloud, that the same forces that allowed the house to exist could one day erase it without warning. Until then, she continued. She enforced the rules. She kept the ledger. She lit the red lamp each night. And under her watch, the house endured, balanced carefully between tolerance and erasure, guided by a woman who asked for no recognition and left no clear trace behind her. In a place where history favored loud voices and violent endings, Eleanor chose silence. And silence, for a time, was enough. The women who arrived at the house did not come from one place. And they did not arrive for one reason. They came from the East. From cities where streets were paved and churches rang bells on Sunday mornings. From towns where factories ran from dawn to dusk. From places where the future had once seemed possible, and then quietly closed its doors. Some arrived by train as far as the rails allowed. Others continued by wagon. A few walked the final miles, carrying everything they owned in a small bag or wrapped in cloth. By the time they reached the town, most of them were exhausted. Their shoes were worn thin. Their hands were soft compared to the men already there. Their eyes carried uncertainty, more than fear. Many believed they were coming for work. The word work had been used carefully. Waitress, housekeeper, singer, companion, promises were made without details. Wages were mentioned without conditions. Distance softened the truth, and hope filled the gaps. By the time reality became clear, turning back was no longer simple. Money was gone. Contacts had vanished. The road behind them was longer than the one ahead. The house did not advertise, but its reputation traveled. Men talked. Drivers talked. Middlemen talked. And slowly, women followed the path laid out for them. When a woman arrived, she was taken inside quietly. Eleanor met her in the back room, away from the common areas. The conversation was calm. It was direct. It was brief. The woman was told where she was. No one pretended otherwise. Shock often followed. Some cried openly. Some sat in silence. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke that would soon be corrected. It rarely was. Those who refused to stay were not physically restrained. Eleanor explained what little assistance could be offered. A meal, a place to rest for the night, directions to the next town. Few took that option. Leaving meant facing the road again, alone. Staying meant certainty, and certainty, even when harsh, often felt safer than the unknown. The women who stayed were given new names. The names were simple, familiar, easy to remember. Mary, Anna, Clara, Rose. Names that blended. Names that left no trace. Birth names belonged to other lives. In the house, names were tools, not identities. The women were taught how to move through the space, where to sit, when to speak, when to remain quiet. They learned which men were regulars and which were unpredictable. They learned quickly. Mistakes were costly. The women came from different backgrounds. But over time, their stories began to share common patterns. A factory job that ended without notice. A husband who drank and disappeared. A family that could not afford another mouth to feed. A promise of marriage that dissolved once the journey began. Some had been educated. Others could barely read. A few spoke with accents that never fully faded. All were reduced to the same routine. Morning rest. Afternoon preparation. Night work. The transition was hardest during the first weeks. Sleep came in fragments. Appetites changed. Silence felt heavier than noise. The house did not encourage friendship among the women, but it did not forbid it either. Bonds formed naturally, often between those who arrived close together in time. They shared food. They shared small comforts. They shared stories carefully, avoiding details that might reopen wounds. The past was a dangerous subject. Some women held on to objects from before. A locket, a letter, a ribbon. Eleanor did not forbid these things, but she did not encourage them. Attachment made departure harder. Over time, many objects were lost, sold, or given away. The women learned to live with less. Appearance mattered, but only within limits. Dresses were provided. Clean, but not extravagant. Hair was styled simply. Makeup was minimal, often used to hide exhaustion rather than enhance beauty. Youth was valued, but it faded quickly in that environment. The women aged faster than they should have. Illness was a constant threat. Coughs lingered. Fevers came and went. Small wounds took longer to heal. When a woman became visibly ill, she was removed from work immediately. She was isolated in a spare room. The doctor was called if possible. Sometimes, help arrived too late. Death, when it came, was quiet. The body was prepared at night. A wagon came before dawn. By morning, the room was cleaned and reassigned. The women learned not to ask questions. They learned that grief was dangerous. Men came and went. Faces blurred together. Names were rarely remembered. Some men were gentle. Others were not. The women learned to read signs. A clenched jaw. A slurred voice. A hand that lingered too long. They learned when to redirect conversation. When to stay silent. When to call for help. Eleanor enforced boundaries, but boundaries were imperfect. The women lived between protection and exposure. Letters from the East arrived occasionally. Some women received them. Others did not. Those who did often hesitated before opening them. News from home could be comforting or cruel. A mother growing older. A sister married. A town changed beyond recognition. Writing back was complicated. What words could be used? Truth was impossible. Lies felt heavy. Many letters went unanswered. As months turned into years, the women changed. Some became hardened. Their movements precise. Their voices flat. They learned to give little and expect less. Others retained fragments of softness. They laughed more easily. They listened more than they spoke. These women often suffered more deeply. A few found small forms of control. They saved money. They negotiated terms. They planned exits quietly. Most plans did not survive contact with reality. Money disappeared through illness or theft. Opportunities closed without warning. Courage faded when faced with the open road. Those who did leave were spoken of briefly, then forgotten. The house did not hold farewell. Gatherings. Life continued. The women learned the rhythms of the town. Paydays brought crowds. Funerals brought silence. Winter brought isolation. They watched seasons change through windows that rarely opened. Snow softened the streets. Dust returned in spring. Heat pressed down in summer. Time passed unevenly. One night felt endless. A year passed unnoticed. The women aged out of the work at different speeds. Some lasted only months. Others remained for years, their presence becoming part of the house's structure. When a woman was no longer suitable for the work, Eleanor made decisions quietly. Some were sent away with money. Some were transferred to other towns. Some remained in lesser roles, cleaning or cooking. None stayed forever. The East, which had once represented opportunity, became a distant idea. Few spoke of returning. Home was no longer a place. It was a memory. By 1870, the house had seen dozens of women pass through its rooms. Their names changed. Their faces blended. Their stories overlapped. What remained constant was the pattern: arrival, adjustment, endurance, departure. The women were not recorded in town documents. They were not counted accurately in censuses. Their lives existed outside official history, yet they were essential to the town's stability. They absorbed loneliness. They softened violence. They carried burdens that allowed others to function. This was not recognized. It was simply expected. At night, when the red lamp burned and the house filled with muted voices, the women moved through their roles with practiced efficiency. They spoke softly. They smiled when required. They listened more than they talked. Behind closed doors, each carried her own thoughts. Some thought of childhood rooms. Some thought of faces they might never see again. Some thought of nothing at all. The house did not care what they thought. It required only presence. And so the women from the East, who had once believed in different futures, became part of a structure that would remember them only as long as it needed them. When they were gone, the rooms would be cleaned. The names would be crossed out. And the house would wait for the next arrival, as it always had, silently, patiently, without regret. The house followed a rhythm that rarely changed. It did not follow the clock used by the rest of the town. It followed its own internal time, shaped by exhaustion, preparation, and repetition. Morning began late. When daylight filled the street outside, the house was quiet. Curtains remained drawn. Doors stayed locked. The red lamp was cold and dark. Inside, the women slept. Sleep came unevenly. Some slept deeply, their bodies finally surrendering after long nights. Others rested lightly, waking at the smallest sound. Dreams were unpredictable. They often returned women to places they no longer belonged. No one was required to rise early. Eleanor understood fatigue. By late morning, movement began. One woman at a time left her room. Barefoot steps crossed the hallway. Water was heated. Faces were washed. Hair was brushed and pinned back without care for appearance. This part of the day belonged to the women themselves. They spoke little. Mornings were not social. The common room filled slowly. Chairs creaked. Dishes clinked. The smell of simple food replaced the scent of night. Meals were plain. Bread, eggs when available. Soup made from whatever supplies had lasted. No one complained. Food was fuel, not pleasure. After eating, the women divided tasks. Laundry was done first. Sheets and clothing were carried outside when weather allowed. Water was drawn and heated. Scrubbing was slow and repetitive. Hands grew raw. Inside, floors were swept. Basins were cleaned. Waste was removed discreetly. Each room was attended to daily. Beds were made. Windows wiped. Floors checked for damage. Eleanor inspected the work without comment. If something was wrong, it would be corrected. Praise was unnecessary. By early afternoon, the house settled again. This was the quietest time. Some women rested. Others sat together in the common room, sewing or mending clothes. A few read, if they could. Books were rare but valued. Conversation, when it happened, stayed light. The weather, supplies, small observations about the town. Personal stories were avoided. The past was not useful here. As the sun moved lower, preparation began. Water was heated again. Baths were taken in rotation. Time was limited. Privacy was minimal. Cleanliness mattered. Illness spread quickly in close quarters. Eleanor enforced hygiene strictly, even when water was scarce. Hair was arranged. Dresses were chosen. Simple adjustments were made to appear rested, even when rest was impossible. By dusk, the house changed. The quiet tension that settled over the women was familiar. Movements became more deliberate. Voices softened. The red lamp was lit. Its glow reached the street, signaling the beginning of the house's second life. Men arrived gradually. Some came alone, others in pairs. Rarely did groups enter together. The door opened and closed steadily. Inside, the common room filled with low conversation. Chairs scraped. Boots were removed. Payment was handled without discussion. Names were rarely exchanged. Eleanor watched everything. She positioned herself where she could see the door and the stairs. She noted who arrived sober and who did not. She noted hands that shook, eyes that avoided contact. If a man was too drunk, he was turned away. Not every decision pleased the customers. Eleanor did not negotiate. The women entered the common room only when directed. They did not sit until invited. They did not speak unless spoken to. This was not submission. It was structure. Structure prevented chaos. Men chose quickly or not at all. Some hesitated. Some stared too long. Some asked questions. The women responded with practiced neutrality. Nothing was promised beyond the moment. Once arrangements were made, movement shifted upstairs. The common room emptied and filled in cycles. Eleanor remained below. She listened. Sounds carried easily through the building. Footsteps, muted voices, occasional laughter that faded quickly. She knew when to intervene. If voices rose, she appeared at the base of the stairs. If a woman called out, Eleanor responded immediately. Her presence resolved most situations without further action. Violence was rare inside the house. When it happened, it was dealt with decisively. A man was removed. His access ended permanently. The woman involved was given time to recover. The cost was absorbed by the house. Order was more valuable than money. As the night progressed, exhaustion returned. The women rotated as needed. No one worked continuously without pause. Eleanor enforced this, even when demand was high. Burnout served no one. Some men stayed only briefly. Others lingered, talking more than moving. Conversation was part of the work. Men spoke of many things. Work underground. Animals lost to storms. Memories of places they no longer planned to return to. The women listened. Listening was safer than responding. Some men cried quietly. Some stared at the wall. Some fell asleep. Those who slept were allowed to rest for a short time. They were woken gently and sent on their way. By midnight, the house reached its peak. Voices overlapped softly. Movement was constant. The air grew heavy with warmth and breath. Eleanor drank water and stayed. Alert. She did not sit. She did not rest. She had learned that the moment she relaxed, something would go wrong. After midnight, the tone shifted. Men who arrived late were often more unpredictable. They carried the weight of the day without its release. Eleanor watched them carefully. She adjusted assignments. She shortened interactions. She increased her presence. Slowly, the flow thinned. By early morning, the last men left. The door was locked. The lamp remained lit for a while longer. Inside, the house exhaled. The women moved quietly through cleanup routines. Sheets were gathered. Basins emptied. Windows cracked open to let in air. Faces were washed again. Dresses were removed and set aside. The transformation back to day began. Eleanor checked each room. She spoke briefly to the women, confirming who needed rest, who felt unwell, who required attention. Notes were made. When everything was settled, the lamp was extinguished. The house returned to silence. This cycle repeated night after night. There were variations. Some nights were busy. Others were slow. Weather affected everything. Paydays brought crowds. Funerals brought emptiness. But the structure remained. The routine protected the women from unpredictability. It protected Eleanor from losing control. It protected the town from itself. Outside, life continued. The saloon closed and reopened. The mine operated until it did not. People arrived and left. Inside the house, time felt suspended. Days blurred together. Weeks passed unnoticed. Birthdays were not celebrated. Holidays passed quietly. Only illness and departure marked time. The women learned to measure life differently. Not by years. By nights survived. Some routines became personal rituals. One woman always washed her hands twice before bed. Another counted the floorboards as she climbed the stairs. Another hummed softly while folding sheets. Small habits provided comfort. Eleanor observed, but did not interfere. As long as the routine functioned. Personal behaviors were tolerated. Occasionally, disruption occurred. A man refused to leave. A woman broke down in tears. A sickness spread faster than expected. When that happened, the routine bent but did not break. Eleanor adapted. She closed rooms. She sent women to rest. She adjusted schedules. The house survived each disruption because it was designed to absorb strain. This was the true purpose of the daily routine. Not efficiency. Containment. By 1870, the routine had been refined over years. New women learned it quickly. Older women moved through it without thought. The house ran like a machine built from habit rather than intention. No one questioned it anymore. The routine was life, and like life in the town itself, it was neither kind nor cruel. It simply continued. Night after night, until it no longer could. The men who stepped through the door of the house were not the same men they had been outside. Outside, they were defined by labor, by dirt under fingernails, by the weight of tools and weapons, by the unspoken competition of strength and endurance that shaped life in the town. Inside, those markers softened. Hats were removed. Voices lowered. Shoulders relaxed, if only slightly. The transition was subtle, but real. Most of the men were miners. Their bodies bore the signs. Bent backs, scarred hands, persistent coughs that lingered long after the dust had settled. They came in small groups or alone, often on paydays, sometimes after weeks underground. For them, the house represented relief, not only of the body, but of the mind. In the mines, silence was dangerous. Conversation distracted. Underground, each man focused inward, listening for cracks, counting breaths. Inside the house, they could speak. They spoke of small things at first: weather, food, the quality of boots. Gradually, deeper subjects surfaced. Men talked about fear, about tunnels collapsing, about the sound of rock shifting, about friends buried without ceremony. They talked about guilt. About leaving families behind, about letters unanswered, about money sent east that never seemed enough. The women listened. Listening was part of the exchange. Not every man came for comfort. Some came seeking control. These men were recognized quickly. They entered loudly. They demanded attention. They tested boundaries. Eleanor watched them closely. She had learned to identify danger before it announced itself. A man who drank too fast. A man who avoided eye contact. A man who clenched his fists when speaking. Such men were managed carefully. They were paired with women who understood how to redirect behavior. Conversations were kept brief. Interactions were monitored. If necessary. Eleanor intervened early. The house did not allow dominance to flourish unchecked. Other men arrived carrying authority. The sheriff, though rarely, deputies, local officials. They did not receive special treatment. They paid like anyone else. They followed the rules. Their presence served a purpose. It reinforced the unspoken agreement that the house existed under tolerance, not immunity. Occasionally, men of wealth arrived. Mine owners, land speculators, merchants with expanding influence. These men expected discretion. They spoke less. They observed more. They left quietly. For them, the house was not a necessity. It was a convenience. Then there were the men who returned night after night. Regulars. They arrived at the same hour, sat in the same chair, spoke to the same woman. Some never went upstairs. They paid to sit and talk. They spoke of memories from before the West, of farms lost, of businesses that failed, of families that drifted apart without conflict or closure. These men often stayed the longest. Their loneliness was deep and settled. The women who listened to them learned patterns. They learned when to ask questions and when silence was more valuable. For these men, the house provided continuity, something stable in a life, defined by movement. The house also received travelers. Men passing through on the way to somewhere else. Wagon drivers, traders, railroad scouts. They carried news, rumors of towns growing faster, of mines richer than expected, of rail lines advancing steadily west. These conversations were overheard. Information moved quietly through the house. Eleanor paid attention. She understood that information shaped survival. Not all men left the house unchanged. Some arrived hardened and left softer. Others arrived gentle and left more distant. The house did not heal. It altered. Men adapted within its walls, then returned to the town carrying whatever remained. Some men treated the women with unexpected kindness. They asked names. They remembered details. They brought small gifts. Such behavior was allowed, but not encouraged. Attachment complicated departure. The women learned to accept kindness without expecting consistency. Many men disappeared without warning. A mining accident, a sudden departure, a fight elsewhere. The women learned not to ask. The house existed in the present. Tense. Men also brought danger. Weapons were common in the town. Knives and revolvers were part of daily life. Inside the house, weapons were discouraged. Men were asked to leave them at the door. Most complied. Those who did not were watched carefully. Violence was rare, but never impossible. When it occurred, it was swift and contained. A man removed. A door closed. A name remembered. Eleanor kept a mental list. Some names never returned. The men noticed patterns as well. They learned that shouting achieved nothing, that demands were ignored, that respect, even if false, produced better outcomes. The house trained its visitors as much as it served them. Some men resented this. They muttered complaints in the saloon. They spoke of unfair treatment, but they returned. The house provided something the saloon could not. Silence without judgment. The men aged visibly. Those who came for years changed before the women's eyes. Hair thinned, posture bent, voices weakened. Some eventually stopped coming. Others arrived less frequently. As money tightened or health declined, a few arrived one final time, stayed longer than usual, and did not return. The women noticed these absences. They did not comment. The house also saw men at their lowest. Men who had lost everything. A mind claim, a partner, a reason to continue. These men were dangerous in different ways. Some sought comfort desperately. Others sought nothing at all. Eleanor limited their access. She shortened their visits. She paired them carefully. She remained alert. The house was not a place for despair to settle unchecked. The town could not afford that. Men sometimes asked questions about the women, about Eleanor, about the house itself. Answers were brief. Curiosity was discouraged. Mystery preserved distance. Distance preserved safety. Outside the house, the men returned to their roles. Workers, enforcers, wanderers. Inside, they were reduced to individuals. Tired, lonely, human. This dual existence allowed the town to function. Without the house, frustrations would have spilled in the streets and saloons. Violence would have been more public, tensions more visible. The house absorbed these pressures quietly. And asked nothing in return, except compliance. Men learned this over time. New arrivals tested limits. Veterans understood them. Occasionally, a man tried to stay. He lingered after closing. He asked to sleep in the common room. He offered extra money. Eleanor refused. The house did not provide shelter beyond its purpose, allowing men to remain. Blurred boundaries. Boundaries were essential. The men who understood this respected Eleanor, even if they did not like her. Those who did not were removed. By 1870, the house had served hundreds of men. Their names were not recorded. Their stories overlapped and faded. What remained was impact. The women carried pieces of these men with them. A phrase repeated, a habit observed, a sadness shared briefly. The house became a collection of fragments of male lives that passed through and moved on. The men rarely considered this. For them, the house was a stop, not a destination. For the women, it was constant. And for the town, it was necessary. The men continued to come, night after night, seeking relief, distraction, or simply a place where the weight of the West felt lighter for a few hours. The house provided that space, quietly, without comment, until the men stepped back into the dust and became who they needed to be again. There was one room in the house that was never mentioned by name. It did not appear in Eleanor's ledger as an active space. It was not assigned to any woman. It was not offered to any man. It existed without purpose, sealed off from the daily rhythm of the house. Most of the women knew of it, Though few had seen inside Dot, it was located at the end of the upper hallway, past the last occupied room. The door faced the wall, slightly angled, as if added later without care for symmetry. Unlike the other doors, it bore no number. Its surface was darker, worn differently, as if touched less often. The door was always locked. No rule was spoken about it. Eleanor never explained it. She never warned against it directly. But the women understood that it was not to be approached. Understanding came from silence. When new women arrived, they noticed the door eventually. They asked questions in whispers, careful not to be overheard. Older women answered without detail. It's closed. It's not used. It's better not to ask. That was enough. The house was full of boundaries. Some were visible. Others were learned through absence. The room belonged to the latter. Years earlier, before some of the current women had arrived, the room had been in use. It had been no different from the others. Same narrow bed, same wash basin, same thin walls that carried sound too easily. The woman assigned to it had been called Clara. That was not her birth name. No one knew what that had been. She had arrived from the east like many others, with a single bag and a face that still carried traces of expectation. She had been quiet, not withdrawn, but reserved. She spoke when necessary and listened more than she talked. She followed rules without resistance. She learned quickly. For a time, she blended into the routine. But Clara did not adapt in the same way as the others. Some women hardened. Some softened. Clara remained unchanged, thought she did not form attachments. She did not seek comfort. She did her work and returned to her room. At night, she was efficient. During the day, she was distant. Eleanor noticed this. Eleanor noticed everything. She watched Clara more closely than she let on. Not because Clara caused trouble, but because she did not. In places like this, absence of trouble was sometimes more concerning than its presence. Clara began to spend more time in her room during the day. She skipped meals occasionally. She declined conversation. When Eleanor asked if she was ill, Clara said no. When asked if she wished to leave, Clara said nothing. The house continued its routine. Then, one winter night, something shifted. The night had been cold and slow. Few men arrived. Snow pressed against the windows. The house felt smaller, quieter. Clara went upstairs with a man shortly after dusk. She did not return. At first, no one noticed. Time passed unevenly in the house. Women rotated. Rooms emptied and filled. It was not until late that Eleanor realized Clara had not come down. She went upstairs herself. The hallway was quiet. Doors closed. Footsteps muffled by the cold. Clara's door was shut. Eleanor knocked once. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. She unlocked the door. What happened inside the room was never described openly. There was no screaming, no visible struggle, no signs of violence that could be explained easily. The man was gone. Clara was not alive. The details were kept private. Eleanor ensured that. The doctor was called before dawn. He stayed briefly. He asked few questions. He offered no clear explanation. The official cause was recorded as illness. The town accepted this without curiosity. Illness was common. Death was expected. But inside the house, the effect was immediate. The room was closed. Clara's belongings were removed quietly. Her name was crossed out in the ledger. The bed was stripped and taken apart. Eleanor made a decision that night. the room would no longer be used. She did not explain why. She did not announce the change. She simply locked the door and never unlocked it again. The women felt the shift. Even if they did not understand it, that sound traveled differently after that. The hallway felt longer. The air felt heavier near the end of it. Some women claimed the temperature dropped near the door, even in summer. Others said they heard movement when no one was there. No one investigated. Fear did not need confirmation. The house adapted. The women were reassigned to other rooms. The routine continued. New arrivals were placed elsewhere. The door remained closed. Years passed. New women arrived who had never known Clara. They heard fragments of the story, distorted by repetition. Some believed Clara had angered Eleanor. Some believed a man had killed her. Some believed she had taken her own life. No version was complete. Eleanor never corrected them. Truth served no purpose here. The room became a presence without function. Women avoided walking too close to it. At night, they moved faster past it. During the day, they did not look at it. Eleanor cleaned the hallway herself. She did not allow others to do it. When asked why the room was kept, why it was not repurposed, why it was not removed, Eleanor answered simply, "It stays." No explanation followed. The house did not question her. The locked room served as a boundary. It reminded the women that the house was not only a place of routine and containment. It was also a place where things could end without warning. Men never saw the door. They were not taken that far down the hallway. They were not told of its existence. The house presented only what was necessary. Over time, the room became something else. Not a memory of Clara, but a symbol. It represented the limits of control. The moment where Eleanor's structure had failed to protect someone fully. Eleanor carried this quietly. She did not show guilt. She did not show grief, but she never opened the door again. Occasionally, something disrupted the silence around the room. A sound that did not belong. A draft with no source. A floorboard that creaked when no one walked on it. These things happened rarely. When they did, the women avoided the area for days. Eleanor noticed. She said nothing. She had learned long ago that fear could not be argued away. The room also affected how Eleanor managed the house. She became more cautious. She shortened interactions. She monitored men more closely. The rules tightened. Some men complained. They said the house felt colder than before. Less welcoming. Eleanor accepted this. Comfort was less important than safety. The town continued its business. The saloon remained loud. The mine continued to pull men underground. Life went on. The room stayed locked. In summer, heat pressed against the walls, but the door remained cool. In winter, frost formed along its edges that no one cleaned inside. Dust settled. Air stagnated. The room became preserved, not as it had been, but as it was left. The house absorbed the absence into its structure. Years later, a new woman asked directly. She was young, newly arrived. She had not yet learned caution. "What's in that room?" she asked, pointing down the hallway. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she answered, "Nothing that concerns you." The woman did not ask again. Understanding arrived quickly in places like this. The locked room also served another purpose. It reminded Eleanor that some things could not be fixed. She had built the house to manage risk, not eliminate it. Clara's death had shown the limits of her control. Eleanor did not allow herself. Reflection. Reflection led to hesitation. Hesitation led to mistakes. She chose instead to reinforce boundaries. The women noticed Eleanor's vigilance. They felt it in the way she watched doors, in how quickly she intervened, in how rarely she allowed exceptions. The house grew quieter, not in sound, but in spirit. The laughter that had once surfaced occasionally faded. Conversation shortened. Movements became more efficient. The women adapted. They always did. The room stayed closed, that it did not haunt the house in the way stories described haunting. There were no apparitions, no voices calling out. Its presence was subtler. It altered behavior. It reminded everyone that the house was not permanent, that safety was conditional, that silence could follow suddenly. By 1870, the room had been closed for years. New women passed it daily without knowing its origin. Older women avoided it without remembering why. Eleanor alone remembered Clara clearly. She remembered the way Clara folded her clothes precisely, the way she avoided mirrors, the way she never complained. These memories surfaced rarely. Eleanor allowed them only at night, when the house was quiet and the ledger closed. She never spoke Clara's name aloud. Names carried weight. The house continued to function. Men came and went. Women arrived and left. The routine held, but the locked room remained as a quiet fault line running through the structure. Invisible, but present. A reminder that even in a place built on control and compromise, something could slip through. And when it did, it left a space that could never be filled again. The door stayed locked. The hallway stayed narrow, and the house learned to live around what it refused to face. After the room was locked, the house did not return to what it had been before. On the surface, everything appeared the same. The lamps were lit each evening. The piano played softly when there were enough men to justify it. The women dressed, worked, washed, and slept according to the same unchanging rhythm. But beneath that routine, something subtle shifted. The house began to breathe differently. It was not something that could be measured or pointed to. It existed in pauses, in glances, in the way footsteps slowed near the end of the hallway. It existed in how doors were closed more carefully, how voices lowered without instruction. Eleanor felt at first. She had built the house on order. Every rule, every boundary, every routine had been shaped through years of observation. She understood men. She understood desperation. She understood how to create a place that absorbed chaos without showing it. But now, the house carried a memory she had not planned for. She did not acknowledge it openly. She did not allow herself the luxury of reflection. But she adjusted. Eleanor began walking the halls more often at night, not loudly, not with purpose that could be questioned. She moved as if she had always done so. She checked doors twice. She listened longer before turning away. When a woman returned from a room later than expected, Eleanor noticed. When a man lingered too long in conversation, Eleanor intervened. The rules tightened quietly. No one complained aloud. They adapted. Men sensed the shift, even if they could not explain it. Some said the house felt colder. Others said it felt quieter than before. A few stopped coming. Eleanor accepted this. The men who remained were those who wanted silence more than indulgence. They drank less. They spoke less. They left earlier. This suited the house. The women changed as well. They stopped sharing stories late at night. Laughter became rare, and when it appeared, it was brief and controlled. No one stayed awake longer than necessary. Sleep became something functional, not comforting. The house learned restraint. At the center of this change was the locked room. Did not demand attention. It did not intrude. It simply existed, shaping behavior through its absence. Eleanor never mentioned it. But occasionally, someone did, usually in a whisper, usually at night. Do you hear that? What? Nothing. Never mind. These conversations ended quickly. No one wanted to give fear a voice. One winter evening, several months after the room had been closed, a storm settled over the town. Snow fell heavily, pressing against the windows, muffling sound. The street outside went silent earlier than usual. Only 3 men came that night. They left before midnight. The house emptied faster than expected. Lamps were dimmed. Doors were closed. Most of the women went to their rooms. Eleanor remained downstairs, seated at the small desk near the entrance. She reviewed the ledger by lamplight, her movements slow and precise. The house was still. Then she heard it, a sound from upstairs. Knob loud. Not sudden. A shift. It was the kind of sound that could be dismissed easily. A settling beam. A change in temperature. The house responding to cold. Eleanor paused. She listened. Nothing. Followed. She returned to the ledger. Minutes passed. Then it happened again. This time, closer. From the direction of the upper hallway, Eleanor closed the ledger. She did not rush. She did not call out. She stood, adjusted her shawl, and moved toward the stairs. Her steps were steady. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, each sound familiar. She reached the upper floor and stopped. The hallway was dim, lit only by the lamp at its entrance. Shadows stretched unevenly along the walls. Eleanor stood still. She listened. There was no movement. No voices. No doors opening or closing. She walked forward. As she approached the end of the hallway, the air grew colder. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Her breath fogged slightly. She stopped several steps. From the locked door. It stood as it always had, closed. Silent. Eleanor waited. She did not know what she was waiting for. Perhaps confirmation that nothing was wrong. Perhaps proof that something was. After a long moment, she turned away. As she did, the sound came again. Soft. From behind the door. It was not a voice. It was not a knock. It was the faintest suggestion of movement. As if something inside had shifted its weight. Eleanor froze. She did not turn back immediately. She listened. Nothing followed. The silence stretched. Eleanor's expression did not change. But something tightened behind her eyes. She reached into her pocket and removed the key. She had kept it all these years. She had never considered using it. Again. Her fingers closed around the metal. House was silent. No footsteps. No breathing. No sound from any other room. Eleanor turned slowly. She faced the door. She stepped closer. Cold was sharper now. She raised her hand toward the lock. Then she stopped. She lowered her hand. Key remained in her grip. Eleanor exhaled. She stepped back. Without another glance, she turned and walked away. She did not look over her shoulder. She returned downstairs and sat at the desk until dawn. The sound did not repeat. The next morning, Eleanor said nothing. The house resumed its routine, but the women sensed the change. Eleanor watched the hallway more closely. She discouraged anyone from lingering near the end of it. She adjusted assignments so that no one was placed in the nearest room for long. The locked room became more isolated. Days passed, then weeks. No further sounds were reported. Some women convinced themselves they had imagined previous disturbances. Others chose not to think about it at all. Fear faded into background awareness. Life continued. Then, one night, a woman did not return to her room. Her name was Margaret. She had arrived the previous spring. Older than most newcomers. Practical, quiet. She did her work without complaint and kept to herself. That evening, she had gone upstairs with a man shortly after sunset. The man left an hour later. Margaret did not come down. At first, no one noticed. It was late when Eleanor realized Margaret had not been accounted for. She went upstairs. Margaret's door was open. The room was empty. The bed was undisturbed. The basin unused. Her belongings still neatly arranged. Eleanor searched the house. Margaret was nowhere to be found. The back door was locked. The windows were secured. No one had seen her leave. Eleanor stood at the end of the hallway, staring at the locked door. She did not move. The women gathered at a distance. Silent. Eleanor turned to them. "Stay where you are," she said. She took the key from her pocket. This time, she did not hesitate. The lock resisted briefly, stiff from years of disuse. Then it turned. The door opened slowly. The room inside was exactly as it had been left. Dust coated every surface. The air was stale. The bed frame lay dismantled against the wall. The floor was bare. There was no furniture. No sign of disturbance. No sign of Margaret. Eleanor stepped inside. The room was empty. She searched thoroughly. There was nothing. She closed the door and locked it again. Eleanor did not explain what had happened. She told the women Margaret had left during the night. She said some people did not announce departures. The explanation was accepted. Explanations always were, but the house changed. Again, the locked room was no longer just a memory. It was a question. Women avoided the hallway entirely unless necessary. Some refused to sleep alone. Others asked to leave. Eleanor allowed departures without resistance. Better an empty bed than unrest. She reinforced rules further. No one went upstairs alone after midnight. No one lingered in hallways. Doors were closed at all times. The house became quieter than ever. The piano was rarely played. Men noticed. Some stopped coming entirely. Those who remained spoke in hushed tones. The town heard rumors. They faded quickly. The house was not a place people lingered over in conversation. By the end of the year, the house had lost part of its purpose. It still functioned, but without warmth, without indulgence. It had become a place of transaction. Only. Eleanor accepted this. She had chosen containment over comfort. At night, when the house slept, Eleanor sometimes sat awake. She listened. The locked room remained silent. She did not open it again. She did not speak Clara's name. She did not speak Margaret's names. Gave shape to absence. She would not allow that. The house endured. It always had. But something had taken root within it. not a presence that moved or spoke. Tension, awaiting, and the house learned, slowly and unwillingly, how to live with it. Time did what it always did in places like this. It moved forward without concern for what it left behind. After Margaret disappeared, the house entered a quieter phase. Not empty, but restrained, like a body holding its breath without realizing it. Men still came, though fewer each month. The road to the town had grown less traveled. Other houses had opened farther west, closer to new mines, newer promises. This house, once carefully positioned at the edge of opportunity, was slowly becoming something men remembered rather than sought. Eleanor noticed this decline, but she did not resist it. She had learned that resistance created noise, and noise attracted attention. Attention led to questions. Questions led to trouble. Instead, she adjusted. She reduced the number of women working each night. She turned some men away politely. She shortened hours. Lamps were dimmed earlier. Music became optional rather than expected. The house settled into a slower rhythm. For the women who remained, this brought a strange kind of relief. Fewer men meant fewer negotiations, fewer risks. But it also meant longer hours of waiting, of sitting with thoughts that had once been kept at bay by constant motion. Waiting was dangerous. It allowed memory to surface. One woman, named Eliza, began to notice patterns. She had been in the house longer than most. Long enough to see women come and go. Long enough to understand how things usually ended. People left. Sometimes suddenly, sometimes quietly. But they left in ways that could be traced. Margaret's disappearance did not fit. Eliza did not speak of this openly. She had learned caution early. Instead, she observed. She noticed that Eleanor never walked past the locked room anymore. She stopped at the turn in the hallway, as if the space but no longer belonged to her. She noticed that drafts still gathered near the door, even on warm nights. She noticed that dust in the hallway shifted slightly between cleanings. As if disturbed, Eliza told herself these were meaningless details. Still, she began to dream. In her dreams, she stood in the hallway alone. The lamps were unlit. The door at the end stood open, though she could never see inside. She felt pulled toward it, not by force, but by certainty. As if she already knew where it led. She woke from these dreams unsettled. She did not mention them. Others had. Dreams too. Not the same, but similar. Hallways, doors. Silence stretching too long. No. One compared notes. Fear shared too openly became real. Eleanor sensed the shift in mood before it surfaced in behavior. She always did. She increased her presence again. She made her rounds more visibly. She spoke more often, though still briefly. She reinforced the rules gently, without explanation. No one challenged her. The house did not need confrontation. It needed containment. One evening, a man arrived who did not belong. Eleanor noticed immediately. He was not rough. He was not loud. He did not smell of drink or desperation. He wore clean clothes, though worn. He carried himself carefully. Men like this were uncommon. He introduced himself as Thomas Reed. His voice was calm. His gaze steady. "I'm looking for someone," he said. Eleanor's expression did not change. "This isn't the place for that," she replied. "So I've been told," he said. But I was also told people pass through here. They do, Eleanor said. They don't stay. Thomas nodded. I understand. I'm not asking for records, just information. Eleanor studied him. Men looking for women usually carried urgency. This man carried patience. Who are you looking for? She asked. Who are you looking for? She asked. A woman named Margaret, he said. She stopped writing. The house went still. Eleanor felt it immediately. The way silence sharpened. The way the women nearby slowed their movements. She left, Eleanor said without hesitation. When? Thomas asked. Some months ago, without saying where she was going. That happens, Eleanor replied. Often. Thomas considered this. She was my sister, he said quietly. Eleanor did not respond. She said this place was temporary, Thomas continued. She said she was saving to leave. She said she would write again soon. Eleanor held his gaze. People say many things, she said. Thomas nodded. Yes, they do. He did not press further. Instead, he asked for a room. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before agreeing. She placed him in one of the lower rooms, close to the stairs, easy to observe. That night, Thomas did not drink much. He did not laugh. He did not linger in common spaces. He spoke with one of the women briefly, politely, and went upstairs. He returned less than an hour later. He did not look satisfied. He looked thoughtful. Over the next few days, Thomas returned often. He did not ask questions directly. He listened. He paid attention to routines, to patterns, to absences. He noticed the end of the hallway. He did not ask about it, but he walked slower when passing the stairs. He looked upward longer than necessary. Eleanor watched him. She did not interfere. Confrontation would reveal too much. One night, Thomas did not leave when expected. The house had begun closing down. Lamps were dimmed. Doors were locked. Eleanor realized Thomas was still upstairs. She climbed the stairs quietly. She found him standing in the hallway, near the end. He turned as she approached. I didn't mean to cause trouble, he said. I just felt something. This area is restricted, Eleanor replied. I know, Thomas said. That's why I stopped. They stood in silence. I don't believe she left, Thomas said finally. Eleanor did not respond. I believe something happened here, he continued. And I believe you know more than you're saying. Eleanor's voice was calm. You believe many things, she said. Belief doesn't make them useful. Thomas studied her. You're protecting something, he said. Or someone. Eleanor stepped closer. I'm protecting the house, she said. And everyone in it. Thomas nodded slowly. I won't press, he said. But I won't stop looking. Eleanor held his gaze. Then you should leave, she said. Thomas did not argue. He left the house that night. He did not return. The women spoke of him quietly for days afterward. Then he faded into memory, like so many others. But his presence had stirred something. The house felt watched. Not from outside, but from within. The locked room seemed closer somehow, as if its distance had shortened. One night, Eliza heard something she could not dismiss. She was awake, lying still, listening to the house settle. A sound reached her ears, soft, rhythmic, not footsteps, not wind. It sounded like breathing. She sat up slowly. The sound did not come from her room. It came from the hallway. Her heart pounded, but she did not move. She waited. The sound stopped. She did not sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, she said nothing, but she packed her things. By evening, she asked Eleanor to leave. Eleanor did not question her. By the end of the month, 3 more women had gone. The house grew emptier. Eleanor allowed it. Fewer people meant fewer risks, but it also meant the house listened more closely to itself. Silence expanded. At night, Eleanor sometimes stood at the base of the stairs and looked up. She did not climb them. She did not need to. She could feel the weight of the upper floor pressing downward, as if the house remembered what she tried to forget. The locked room remained closed. No further disappearances occurred. No explanations surfaced. Life continued in reduced form, but the house had changed permanently. It was no longer simply a place of transaction. It was a place that held something unresolved. And unresolved things did not fade. They waited, patiently, just as the house itself had learned to do by the time spring returned to the town. The house was no longer what it had once been. It still stood at the same edge of the street. Its windows still caught the evening light. The red lamps still glowed when dusk settled in. To anyone passing by, it appeared unchanged. But those who stepped inside felt it immediately. The house had grown inward. Where it had once absorbed the town's noise and desperation, it now reflected its own silence. Sounds did not travel as far. Conversations ended sooner. Movements were measured, restrained, as if everyone feared disturbing something that rested just beneath the surface. Eleanor was the only one who moved as she always had. Her posture remained straight. Her voice remained calm. Her authority did not waver. If the house had changed, she did not show it. But she slept less. At night, Eleanor often sat alone in the downstairs parlor, long after the lamps were dimmed. She did not read. She did not write. She listened. The house had its own language now. It spoke in pressure and absence, in pauses that lasted a moment too long. Eleanor understood this language better than anyone. She had built the house piece by piece, rule by rule. She knew its rhythms, its weaknesses, its habits. And she knew something was approaching. Not an event. Not a person. A reckoning. The women who remained sensed it too. There were fewer of them now. Only those who had nowhere else to go, or who preferred familiarity over uncertainty. They stayed close to one another. They avoided the upper floor unless necessary. No one volunteered to clean near the locked room anymore. Eleanor did it herself. She moved down the hallway with deliberate steps, carrying a small lantern and a cloth. She wiped the walls, the floor, the door itself. The door never resisted her touch. It was solid, unchanged. But Eleanor felt something beneath it, like tension held too long. She never spoke to the door. She never listened closely enough to invite imagination. She cleaned, turned, and left. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed simply, without flourish. Eleanor recognized the handwriting immediately. Thomas Reed. She stood at the desk for a long moment, the unopened letter resting beneath her hand. Then she opened it. The letter was short. He wrote that he had continued searching, that he had spoken to people in nearby towns, that no one had seen Margaret after her last letter. He wrote that he did not accuse Eleanor directly, but he believed the house held answers. He wrote that unresolved things did not disappear. They only changed shape. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beneath the ledger. She did not respond, but the letter confirmed what she already knew. The past had not stayed buried. That night, Eleanor dreamed. This was unusual. She rarely dreamed. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and controlled. But this night, sleep pulled her under. She dreamed of the hallway. It was longer than she remembered. The walls stretched, narrowing as they receded. The lamps flickered, casting uneven shadows. At the end of the hallway, the locked door stood open. Inside, the room was not empty. Clara stood near the far wall. Margaret sat on the floor. They did not look at Eleanor. They looked past her. Eleanor woke abruptly, her heart pounding. The house was silent. She did not return to sleep. By morning, Eleanor had made a decision. She did not announce it. She did not explain it. She began preparing the house for closure. Not permanently, not publicly, but she reduced operations further. She sent 2 women away with money and provisions. She declined new arrivals. She turned men away more often than she admitted. The house grew quieter by the week. Word spread. Men stopped coming entirely. The piano was closed. Lamps were lit only in necessary rooms. The house became something else. A shell. The women who remained sensed the shift. "Are we leaving?" one asked. "Not yet," Eleanor replied. She did not know when, only that something had to end before something else could begin. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the street outside emptied, Eleanor locked the front door earlier than usual. She climbed the stairs alone. She walked the hallway slowly. She stopped before the locked door. This time, she did not hesitate. She removed the key. The lock turned smoothly. The door opened. The room greeted her with stillness. Dust floated in the lamplight. The air was heavy, unmoving. The walls bore faint marks where furniture had once leaned. Eleanor stepped inside. She closed the door behind her. The silence deepened. She stood in the center of the room and allowed herself to look. Not for signs of the women, but for the truth. This room had not taken Clara. This room had not taken Margaret. The house had. Not as a force, not as a presence, but as a place that absorbed pain without release. Clara had come here with nothing left to give. Margaret had come with hope she refused to abandon. The house had offered them shelter, but it had also asked for silence. Eleanor understood now what she had refused to see. She had built a place where things could disappear without acknowledgement, where endings could be smoothed over, where absence became routine. The room was not cursed. It was honest. Eleanor felt something loosen inside her. She sat on the floor. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember. She remembered Clara's quiet voice, Margaret's careful letters, the countless others who had passed through and left parts of themselves behind. She had told herself she was protecting them. She had been protecting the structure. The room remained silent. No sounds, no movement. Eleanor stood. She did not close the door. She left it open and returned downstairs. The next morning, Eleanor gathered the remaining women. "This house will close," she said. Not temporarily, not eventually. It would close. She gave them time, money, options. Some cried, some nodded, some looked relieved. No one argued. Over the next weeks, the house emptied. Beds were dismantled, furniture sold, personal belongings packed and taken away. The locked room remained. Open. Dust settled. The house felt lighter. On the final night, Eleanor walked through every room. She extinguished lamps one by one. When she reached the end of the hallway, she paused. The open room waited. Eleanor did not enter. Again. She closed the door gently. She locked it. Not to contain. But to mark an ending. At dawn, Eleanor left the house. She did not look back. The house stood, empty. Time passed. The town moved on. New buildings rose farther west. Roads shifted. Maps were redrawn. The house remained unused. Years later, travelers would pass by and note the old structure at the edge of the street. Some would say it had once been a place of business. Others would say it was abandoned after something went wrong. No one knew the details, and no one needed to. The house had served its purpose. It had held what others would not. And when it could no longer do so safely, it had been allowed to rest. Silence settled over it, not as punishment, but as release. The house did not disappear when Eleanor left. That was the first thing people misunderstood. Places like that were not erased by closure. They did not vanish simply because doors were locked and lamps went dark. They remained quietly, holding the shape of what they had been. For a long time after Eleanor's departure, the house stood exactly as she had left it. The front door locked. The windows shuttered. The red lamps removed, leaving pale outlines on the wood where they had once hung. Dust gathered slowly. Wind moved through cracks Eleanor had never noticed. Floorboards expanded and contracted with the seasons. The house settled into itself, as if exhaling after years of tension. The town changed around it. Men moved farther west. New roads were cut. The old street grew quieter, less important. Businesses closed or relocated. The saloon down the road burned one winter and was never rebuilt. But the house remained. Children dared each other to approach it during the day. They ran away before reaching the steps. Adults did not encourage this curiosity, but neither did they forbid it. The house was treated like an old scar, acknowledged, but not examined too closely. No one moved in, not because the structure was unsound. It remained solid, better built than many newer buildings. But no one wanted to be the first. People said it felt wrong, not dangerous, not haunted in the way stories preferred. Just wrong. Years passed, then decades. The house aged. Paint peeled. The roof sagged slightly. Windows cracked and were never replaced. Weeds overtook the yard. The fence leaned and eventually fell. The locked room remained locked. No one knew this for certain, of course. No one checked, but the door never opened. Occasionally, someone passing by late at night claimed to see a light flicker in an upper window. These stories were inconsistent and unconvincing. They faded quickly. The house was not interested in drawing attention. In time, the town itself began to forget. Maps changed. Names changed. The street was renamed. New residents arrived who had never known Eleanor or the women or the routines that once defined the place. To them, the house was simply old, a structure from another era, a reminder of something they did not ask to understand. One autumn, many years later, a surveyor arrived. He was hired by a company planning to expand the rail line. His job was to assess old properties along the proposed route. He was methodical, practical, uninterested in stories. When he reached the house, he noted its age, its condition, its location. He entered through the front door, which yielded easily. The lock had rusted through. Inside, the air was stale but not unbearable. Dust coated everything, but there was no smell of decay. The house had not been occupied, but it had not rotted. The surveyor moved from room to room, making notes. He did not linger. When he reached the stairs, he hesitated. Not from fear, from instinct. He could not explain it later. He would only say that something told him to slow down. He climbed the stairs. The upper floor was darker, the windows smaller. The hallway stretched ahead, narrower than expected. At the end of it stood a door. Closed. Unlike the others, it was intact. The wood was darker, better preserved. The surveyor approached. He touched the handle. It did not turn. The lock held. He frowned. It was unusual. Everything else in the house had surrendered to time. This door had not. He tried again. Harder. Nothing. He considered forcing it. Then he stopped. Not because of fear, because the thought felt unnecessary. He made a note in his ledger. Unopened room. Locked. Structure. Sound. That was all. He left the house and did not return. Rail line was built farther north. The property was never purchased. The house remained untouched. Time continued. Weather wore down the exterior. The interior stayed remarkably intact. The locked room remained closed. In the early years of the 20th century, a local historian attempted to document older buildings in the area. He interviewed long-term residents, collected fragments of stories. When he asked about the house, responses were vague. It was a business, someone said. A boarding house, another suggested. No, an older man replied. It was something else. What kind of something else? The man shrugged. Does it matter? The historian made a note. No further details emerged. The house resisted clarity. In the 1930s, during a particularly harsh winter, a fire broke out several buildings away. It spread quickly, consuming old wood and dry structures. The house stood directly in its path. Flames reached the yard. They licked the fence posts, the porch, the lower walls. Then the wind shifted. The fire moved on. The house remained. Some called it luck. Others did not comment. After that, the house was left entirely alone. No children approached it anymore. No one passed close enough to peer inside. It became part of the landscape. something you saw without seeing. Inside, the rooms remained empty. Dust thickened. Spiders built and rebuilt their webs. The locked room stayed sealed. No sound emerged. No movement. If the house held anything, it held it quietly. By the mid-century, the town itself had shrunk. Many buildings stood empty. Roads fell into disuse. The house outlasted them. It did not demand survival. It simply endured. If someone had entered it then, they would have found no trace of Clara. No trace of Margaret. No trace of Eleanor. Only absence and the shape left by what had once been present. The locked room would still be there. Waiting. Not for release. But for acknowledgement, which never came and perhaps never needed. 2. Long after the house had been emptied, long after Eleanor's name faded from memory, the building continued to exist in a way few places did. It did not invite attention. It did not resist time. It simply remained. Seasons passed through it without permission. Summer heat pressed against its walls, warming the dust and old wood. Winter crept in through cracks, laying frost across the floors. Rain found its way through the roof in slow, patient drops, staining ceilings that no one bothered to repair. Still, the structure held. Inside, silence deepened. Silence, when given enough time, changed character. It stopped being empty and became full. Full of echoes that had nowhere to go. Full of moments that had never been spoken aloud. The house absorbed these things. Travelers occasionally stopped near the property. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by necessity. A broken wheel, a tired horse, a storm that came too quickly. Most did not enter. They felt something before they reached the door. Not fear exactly, more like hesitation without a clear cause. The kind that made people adjust their plans without realizing why. Those who did step inside rarely stayed long. They described the interior as intact but unsettling, as if the house expected something from them and they did not know what it was. They left quietly. Years went by. The world beyond the house shifted in ways it never could have imagined. Trains replaced wagons. Towns grew, then shrank. People moved faster, spoke louder, forgot more easily. The house did not follow. Inside, the rooms remained in their final state. Bare floors, empty corners, walls marked faintly by furniture long removed. The upstairs hallway still narrowed. Near the end, the locked room still waited. No one checked the lock. No one tested it. The door had become an agreement between the house and the world. One late summer evening, a woman arrived. She was not from the town. She was passing through, traveling alone, which was uncommon even then. She carried little with her and asked few questions. Her horse went lame just outside the old street. She looked for shelter. Someone pointed toward the house without thinking. She approached it slowly. Unlike others, she did not stop at the steps. She climbed them. The front door opened easily. Inside, the air was thick but calm. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. She did not rush. She walked through the lower rooms, touching nothing, listening. Her footsteps echoed softly. She did not react. She climbed the stairs. At the top, she paused. The hallway stretched ahead. She felt it then. not a presence. Ah, wait. Dot. She moved forward anyway. When she reached the end of the hallway, she stood before the locked door. Dot. She did not touch it. She did not test it. She simply stood there. Time passed. Dot. No one knows how long. Finally, she stepped back. She left the house without entering another room. Outside, she mounted her horse carefully and rode away. She did not tell anyone what she felt. She did not need to. The house continued. Its existence became less physical and more conceptual. It lived in half-remembered stories, in warnings given without explanation, in the way locals avoided certain topics. They spoke of it indirectly. That old place, better not. Nothing good ever stayed there. No one mentioned the women. No. One mentioned Eleanor, not because they were forgotten, but because remembering required responsibility. And responsibility was something time rarely accepted. Inside the house, nothing changed. The locked room remained sealed. If the house held memory, it held it without judgment. It did not demand resolution. It did not seek understanding. It simply remembered. Not in images or words. In shape. In pressure. In absence. The house had learned what people often did not. That not everything needed to be opened. That not every door was meant to be unlocked. That some endings were not conclusions, but boundaries. Eventually, even the road near the house faded. Grass overtook it. Travelers found easier paths elsewhere. The house stood alone. And in its isolation, it was finally at rest. Not healed. Not forgiven, but finished. The locked room remained. And the silence held. Silence, when it lasts long enough, begins to change the meaning of a place. By the time the house reached its final years, it no longer belonged to the town or even to the land beneath it. It existed in a quieter category, one that had nothing to do with ownership or memory. It had become something observed rather than used, something passed by rather than entered. House no longer waited. That was the difference. Waiting implied expectation, anticipation, a future moment when something might happen. The house had moved beyond that. Its doors stayed closed, not because they were guarding anything, but because there was nothing left to respond to. The structure had completed its purpose long ago. Whatever it had been built to contain had settled, not into peace, but into stillness. Years folded into decades. Wood weakened. Nails rusted. The roof sagged further, then finally collapsed inward during a heavy winter. Snow filled the upper rooms. Rain followed, soaking floors that had once been polished and walked with care. The upper hallway warped and bowed. The locked room remained intact longer than the rest. Its door, thicker than the others, resisted rot. The lock held, swollen but unbroken. Even as the walls around it cracked, the frame stayed steady, as if anchored to something deeper than the house itself. No one noticed this. No one was watching closely anymore. The land changed hands eventually. A distant company bought large sections of unused territory, including the plot where the house stood. The purchase was a line in a ledger. No inspection was required. The house was marked for removal. When the crew arrived, they were practical men. They worked quickly. They did not ask questions about abandoned buildings. There were too many of them, scattered across the land like forgotten punctuation. They began with the lower floors. Boards were pried loose. Windows shattered. Walls came down with hollow thuds. Dust filled the air. Nothing unusual happened. The house gave way easily, as old structures did when they were finally allowed to fall. When they reached the upper floor, progress slowed. The hallway had shifted strangely. Some boards resisted removal. Others collapsed suddenly. One man commented that the place felt uneven. Another said the air was stale in a way that made breathing uncomfortable. They worked anyway. Then, they reached the end of the hallway. The door stood. Their closed, intact. The men paused. It was not fear that stopped them. It was curiosity. One of them tried the handle. It did not turn. Another laughed and suggested forcing it. They tried. The door resisted. They stepped back and examined it more closely. The frame was solid. The lock was old, but well set. It's just a room, one of them said. They brought tools. The first blow cracked the wood around the frame, not the door itself. The second widened the split. Then the sound changed. The men would later struggle to describe it. Not a noise exactly, more like a shift in pressure, as if the space behind the door reacted. They stopped. No one gave an order. No one explained. They simply stepped back. After a moment, one of them said, "Let it be." No one argued. They marked the door and moved on. The rest of the house came down around it. Walls collapsed. Beams fell. Floors caved in. The locked room stood alone for a short while, exposed to the sky. Its walls held. The door still closed. Then, slowly, inevitably, gravity finished what time had begun. The structure collapsed inward. Wood split. Stone cracked. The door disappeared beneath debris. There was no sound that marked the moment as important. No one noticed. The crew cleared the site and moved on. The land was leveled. Grass grew back. Nothing marked where the house had stood. Years later, no one could have pointed to the exact location. The town itself was gone by then, absorbed into newer developments, newer names, newer purposes. If memory remained, it existed only in fragments, in stories told without detail, in instincts passed down without explanation. People avoided building too close to that stretch of land. No one knew why. They simply did. And beneath the soil, beneath the layers of time and weather and forgetting, the space where the locked room had existed remained. Unchanged. Not preserved. Not active. Just complete. Whatever had been contained, there had not escaped. It had not needed to. It had never been a thing that moved or spoke. It had been an accumulation. Of silence. Of compromise. Of endings without acknowledgement. The house had carried it for as long as it could. Then it had let go. The world continued. It always did. And nothing else was required. Long after the house was gone, long after the land was flattened and reshaped, something of it remained. Not in wood. Not in walls. Not even in memory. At least not in the way people usually understood memory. It remained in patterns. The land where the house had once stood was eventually absorbed into something new. A road was laid nearby. Then another. A small settlement appeared, then faded, replaced by something more permanent. Time layered itself carefully, covering the past without fully sealing it. People built nearby, but never directly on that spot. They did not plan it that way. No meetings were held. No warnings were passed down clearly enough to be traced. It simply happened. Survey lines shifted a few yards to the side. Foundations were adjusted slightly. Fences curved where they should have been straight. When asked why, people shrugged. It just felt better that way. No one questioned this answer. They rarely do. Years turned into generations. Those who lived near the area did not speak of the old house, because they did not know it had existed. The name Eleanor meant nothing to them. Clara and Margaret had dissolved into the vast, unnamed space where most lives eventually went. And yet, the place carried a subtle effect. Dogs avoided it. Horses slowed when passing near it. Children playing nearby felt an unexplained urge to leave that particular patch of ground alone. No one was frightened. Fear would have given it too much shape. What lingered was quieter, a sense of completion, the kind that followed something properly finished, not something unresolved. Because in the end, the house had not been a place of horror. It had not been a place of evil. It had been a place of containment. It had existed because the world around it demanded such places. Places where people could be reduced to roles, where pain could be organized, where silence could be exchanged for survival. Eleanor had understood this better than most. She had not been kind, but she had been deliberate. She had not saved everyone, but she had prevented more harm than she allowed herself to acknowledge. And when the structure she built could no longer hold what it carried, she had ended it. That was the difference. Most places like that were abandoned suddenly, burned, forgotten in panic or shame. They left their damage scattered, unresolved. This one had been closed. It had been emptied. It had been allowed to finish. And because of that, it did not reach outward after it was gone. It did not linger as a wound. It lingered as a boundary. Sometimes, late at night, when the land was quiet and the air still, something almost like calm could be felt there. Not peace, exactly. Peace suggested comfort, and this place had never offered that. What it offered instead was rest. Rest for the stories that had passed through it. Rest for the names that were never spoken aloud. Rest for the silence that had been asked to carry too much. If someone stood there long enough, they might feel a faint pressure, like the end of a long breath. Then nothing. No sound. No image. Just the sense that something had been held carefully and then released at the right moment. That was all. The world continued forward, as it always did. New stories formed elsewhere. New places took on the burden of containing what society preferred not to see. Different names, different faces, the same quiet arrangements. But this place did not repeat itself. It had done its work. And when work like that was finished properly, it did not echo. It faded. Not into darkness. Into absence. And absence, when it was complete, required no explanation. The land remained. The sky passed over it. Time moved on. And nothing more needed to be said.